2025 is upon us, so it's a good time to think back over the last year and figure out maybe some mistakes we made and some things we want to change about both our songwriting and maybe things like our arranging and our recording going into 2025. So let's talk about 7 changes that I'm going to make going into 2025. The first idea, and possibly the most important, is to spend more time verifying the key is precisely the right key and the tempo is precisely right. This is something too often I don't think we do. We rush into things where, let's say we're writing a song and it's in G major, and we just say, I wrote it in G major, so it's in G major. But we can so easily just test G sharp major or A flat major, or try going down by a half step and verifying. Especially if you're a pianist, this is pretty simple to do. And even if you're a guitarist, it's really simple to do by putting a capo on. You can use a capo to just test out different keys. Because it may be true that you can sing it really well and the song sounds good in G major, but it might sound even better and it might be even more comfortable for you vocally if you move it to A flat major. It may be true the other way around too, where you're going lower and that sounds better. And the same thing's gonna be true for tempo. Maybe you write it at, let's say, 96 beats per minute, and maybe it sounds good at 96 beats per minute, and you say, yeah, why change anything? It might sound even better at 100 beats per minute, or even better at 92, or you might find, you know what, after I tried it at 100 and 104, I realized 96 actually kind of sounds like it drags, but I never noticed that until I tried it at 100 and 104. So spending extra time to verify that the key is exactly the right key and the tempo is exactly the right tempo is a great thing to do that I certainly will spend more time on doing, and you totally should do. Change number 2 is writing harmony vocals before recording. This is another lesson learned from the EP that I just finished recording, but I am not super great at hearing harmonies. It's probably one of my biggest songwriting, arranging, performing weaknesses, I would say. I don't know what it is, but even though I was in choirs for like most of my life, when it comes to just being able to harmonize with things, it's just not my strong suit. So I went into recording really expecting myself to figure out the harmonies on the fly. But really, I'm a much stronger composer and thinking compositionally and about writing than I am improvising harmonies. So for me especially, as somebody who's better at the writing and understanding music theory and music composition level, I should have just written the harmonies instead of going in expecting myself to feel it out. This could maybe connect to a bigger point that you can hopefully take away, which is think about your weaknesses and address them. My weakness, or one of my weaknesses, is that I'm just not that good at hearing something and just hearing, oh, this is the harmony, and here's another harmony part. It's just not something I'm very good at. Am I working on it? Yes, but I'm still not good at it. I'm better at composing and thinking about harmony from a technical standpoint where I'm writing it out. So that's what I should do, at least until I get better at hearing harmonies. Thinking explicitly about how to deal with your weaknesses, huge thing to do. That's what I'm doing here. So I'm gonna write my harmonies instead of trying to just figure them out on the fly. And the third change I'm making is not necessarily a change so much as a continuation of what I was doing at the back half of 2024, trying to spend an hour and a half every single day working specifically on songwriting and recording. Before, I really tried to make it at least a half an hour a day, but the habit kind of waned and came, and sometimes I would spend 2 hours writing for one day, and then 1 hour the next day, and then 0 hours the next day. And while I was pretty decent at keeping up a habit of at least doing a little bit every day, at least 15 minutes or so, I really have found that the best amount of time for me right now is something like spending an hour and a half every single day. An hour and a half is a good amount of time to get into a songwriting mindset, especially for things like lyrics, which usually takes a little time to kind of get into that lyric writing mindset. Most of us during the day aren't doing things that get us into the mindset of a lyricist. An hour and a half is a good amount of time to really be able to dive in a way that is kind of hard to do if you're doing only something like half an hour. And then an hour and a half is also a good amount of time for things like recording. Hopefully you have a nice recording setup where you just plug in your guitar and go, or your piano's already plugged in, and by piano I mean keyboard, whatever it is. So hopefully you have a nice setup where you don't have to spend like 15 minutes every single time you record just to set up, because that's a giant waste of time. But even if you did have to spend 15 minutes to set up and 15 minutes to tear down, an hour and a half still gives you an hour's worth of time of getting stuff done. I found that an hour and a half, at least for me, is a really good amount of time where I feel pretty accomplished every day. I get a good amount done. It's enough time to get get into the zone. It's just a good amount of time that works for me, so it's something that I'm sticking with in 2025. Fourth change I'm making in 2025 is to make sure to record vocals, or at the very least spend time recording scratch vocals, or practice vocals, I guess you could see them that way, before recording instruments that are non-MIDI. Let me explain what I mean by this. If you don't know, basically when we are recording, there are two types of files that you tend to record. There are MIDI files and there are audio files. Audio is just audio. It's the sound of the guitar. It's the sound of your voice. MIDI is technically just recording information. So I can play the keyboard, and technically what is actually recorded is that Joseph hit the note C for this long at this time. But it's information. So a beautiful thing about recording in MIDI and the instruments that you record utilizing MIDI is you can edit them after the fact. So you can be like, there's one note I screwed up in this song, I can just change it. You also can do things like record the piano part, and then you can be like, well, I played it in C major, and now I'm just gonna shift it up to C sharp major. And it will now just play in C sharp major because it's just information. It's not an actual recording of audio. So that all aside, the reason that I want to record MIDI first and then vocals is to make sure that the vocals are in that right key that I was talking about before committing to recording things that you will actually have to re-record if you screwed up the key. If I record the keyboard part and I record some strings that are utilizing MIDI, nobody's coming in and playing strings for me, right? I'm just utilizing virtual instruments for strings. So if I start recording the vocals and I realize, man, this is just not quite in the right key. This note just doesn't sound quite right. It's maybe a little out of my range or not in the most comfortable part of my range. So then what I can do when I've only recorded MIDI is select all the notes and literally just move it. That's it. Instead, something that's happening, the next EP I already had started to record some electric guitars. I'm now probably going to have to re-record those electric guitars because I'm just now realizing that two of the songs are probably not in the ideal key. One is in C major, and I found that I think I can sing it better if it's actually higher in D major. And even then, I haven't totally verified that yet, so maybe it'll end up being best in C sharp major, or maybe even E flat major, though I doubt it. I'm pretty sure D major is gonna be right. Regardless, I'm gonna have to re-record the electric guitar stuff. All the other instruments that are in MIDI, I wouldn't even have to re-record. Wouldn't be a big deal. So going into 2025, being really intentional about recording vocals as the first audio instrument that I record, so that if the vocals aren't right, I can just shift all the MIDI notes to be in the right key, and then record the vocals, make sure it's good, and then I can record all the things like electric guitar and acoustic guitar that are actual audio files that you can't just, I mean, technically, I guess you could pitch correct them, but that usually would make it sound pretty bad. So, being intentional, recording vocals at the right time, after MIDI instruments, before the other audio instruments. Fifth change is again more of a continuation of what I was doing in the back half of 2024, but it's pushing more and more towards non-diatonic music, the use of modes, the use of borrowed chords, and really when I say the use of non-diatonic music, you're still gonna have a center of gravity with a tonic. What I mean is thinking less and less about like, oh, well, that's not in the key, and thinking more of, no, do I want some chromaticism here? All right, let me figure out how to get some chromaticism in a way that sounds good, and I know I'm breaking outside of the key. I know I'm utilizing borrowed chords. I might even be cognizant of, well, I kind of want to go into a Lydian mode, so I might think about using a major 2 chord, and if everything I just said is really confusing to you, that's okay. The main point here is being intentional about maybe something music theory that you discovered or that you've been thinking about that maybe you haven't really leveraged in your songwriting very much. I certainly started probably 2 years ago or so using modes more in my songwriting, but now I've noticed that I'm really getting into true non-diatonic writing sometimes, where I'm either doing more things chromatically or just worrying less about like, but I'm not in this key, because that is kind of the natural progression. You should learn the rules first and then learn how to break them. So I'm trying to take the how to break them sort of to the extreme at this point, because it's just a great way to change things up, and it's something that I've been enjoying, so I'm being more intentional about that. Sixth change I'm making in 2025 essentially is just picking up the acoustic guitar again. Essentially, after writing the songs for the EP that I just finished, I almost completely abandoned writing with the acoustic guitar at all. Historically, I probably have leaned something like 60% piano, 40% acoustic guitar, that instrument being sort of the main instrument of the song. I'm ignoring electric guitar for the moment, just for the sake of easy numbers here. But essentially, more songs than not are piano, but it's more or less balanced. And then in the last 4 years or so, I essentially just totally abandoned the acoustic guitar completely and just wrote everything with the piano. And if not the piano, with other things that technically I was utilizing a keyboard to write. I think I've written more songs based off of an organ sound than I have an acoustic guitar in the last 4 years. So I think I took it a little too far, and it's time to go back to the acoustic guitar. I'm back to listening to acoustic guitar and being like, ah, yes, that's why I love guitar as well. Because I almost forgot that I loved acoustic guitar for a while there. I was so in love with the piano, which I am better at the piano, and I do prefer the piano, but I took it too far. I want to go back to writing with the acoustic guitar as well. And a seventh change I'm making, which I kind of alluded to with the last one actually, is doubling down on organs. Because man, if there's one instrument sound that I think is just glorious and criminally underutilized, top of the list for me, honestly, is the organ. I was talking to a songwriter friend of mine and was talking to him about how I feel like the organ is kind of like a hybrid between a piano and an electric guitar, in that an electric guitar is like sheer power. The most glorious thing, in my opinion, about an electric guitar is that it provides that just sheer melt-your-face power when you think of one plugged in with an amp and distortion and all that. It's like the most powerful instrument there is. And then if you think about a piano, it sounds sort of old and classical and refined and maybe a little snooty even, depending. But if you take those two and combine them, what do you have? I would say the organ, like a huge pipe organ, is powerful, but it sounds regal and old, and it just has this sort of glorious sound. And it's not utilized like at all. I mean, especially outside of church music, it's not used even a little bit. And yeah, 70s rock did like corny organ sounds and things like that, and even those sometimes were still awesome, even though the organ really didn't sound that great. But just in general, especially in more modern music, the use of an organ, especially as the foundational instrument and not just a side instrument that kind of just fills in the mix a little bit, but as the main instrument of a song, criminally underutilized. I love the organ. So I'm just gonna dedicate more time to songwriting with organ sounds being the main instrument. So those are 7 changes that I'm making. Hopefully some of those got your brain going. Some of those are things that you might think, oh yeah, I might do that same thing. Or you might just think, huh, well, I hate the organ, but what is the instrument that I think super underrated and isn't utilized enough? Maybe I can utilize that instrument more in my songwriting. And if in general you just want to get started with songwriting and you want to get all the writer's block out of the way, a great thing for you to grab is my free 20 different ways to start writing a song cheat sheet. It gives you, shocker, 20 different ways to start writing a song, whether from a musical standpoint or a lyrical standpoint, because I'm a huge believer in just changing up how you start your song can make a huge difference in how the song ends up. It can make it easier to stay creatively fresh, because a lot of times people get stuck because they always start their song the same way over and over again. It's a great way to have all your songs sound the same. It's a great way to end up being sort of creatively stuck because you're never breaking outside of that just narrow-minded way of writing a song. I always write a song by writing a chord progression first, or I always write a song by writing the bass line first. Changing it up sometimes is a great way to go. It's been very helpful for me. I'm sure it will be helpful for you as well. So be sure to grab that, songwritingtheory.com/free guide. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and go out and write some great songs in 2025.